Welcome, everyone, to the Clocking Out podcast. It is a show about people who share their own personal journey that include making bold choices to clock out of situations, to follow their dreams of career fulfillment, and to live their best, their most authentic lives. I am your host, Raymond Lee, and this podcast could not be possible without the support of Career Minds. Today, I'm incredibly delighted to welcome Casey Brown to the show. Casey's from a small blue-collar town in Ohio where she grew up with a couple of brothers and hardworking parents. And at an early age, Casey was encouraged to go to college, and her parents instilled in her the value of an education that would ultimately set her up for success. Casey graduated with a dual degree in chemical engineering and Spanish with an MBA from Case Western Reserve University. She spent her career working in corporate before launching her company, Boost Pricing, where she helps companies sell at a higher price while boosting confidence in sales teams. Her signature TED Talk, which received over 4 million views, Casey shares a notable quote that no one will ever pay for what you're worth. They'll only pay for what they think you're worth. So in this episode, Casey shares her personal journey, her expertise in building confidence, and her new book, Fearless Pricing. So without further ado, please enjoy Casey Brown and her clocking out story. Casey, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to see you.
Thanks, Raymond. I'm so happy to be with you.
Yeah, I was just reflecting back, and it has been 5 years ago. This month is when we hired your company to come to Philadelphia to do some consulting for us around our pricing strategy. And I literally went into my Outlook calendar and I knew it was the month before COVID because we were debating of whether, we needed to reschedule. There was sort of like this pandemic thing looming. And I went into my calendar and we did our pre-call a week ago. It was February 5th. Of 2020
Wow.
is when, and someone referred you to us, and and here we are. Would you have ever imagined when we met 5 years ago that I would be saying, in 5 years, Casey, you and I are going to be on a podcast together?
No, I had no imagined path to this moment for sure. But I think nothing about the 5 years was anything that was particularly imaginable, especially the pandemic period. I mean, it's been a lot of unexpected twists and turns, but I'm happy to be back with you at this point.
Yeah, I am as well. And as I reflect on your mission of your company, which is to help organizations be paid well for their excellence, and you certainly provided some value to our organization as we think about ourselves in the marketplace. I'm excited about this conversation because anyone who's listening, who is trying to get paid for the value that they bring to the market as an individual, I think there's so much overlap between the work that you're doing, whether you're serving organizations or just really helping individuals identify their value and really, sort of get paid for the work that they're doing. And so what I like to do, Casey, is start from the beginning. Share with us a little bit about where you're from, maybe what your parents did for a living, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I'm from a small town south of Youngstown, Ohio. There was a pretty famous train derailment there a couple years ago, so nobody had ever heard of my town. And then all of a sudden we were on the map. But raised very blue collar, grandfather was a coal miner. My dad had a number of different kinds of jobs. He was a construction day laborer. He's was a truck driver. He really kind of chased work wherever it was. He was laid off a lot. My mom stayed home with us. So we were, it was pretty tight conditions, financially speaking. It was raised below the poverty line. And I think, that as we, talk about the rest of my path, I think that left a mark in some ways, and in some ways very good. There were some incredibly valuable lessons learned by growing up in humble financial situation. But then I think also there was some fear that sort of got instilled there, and that informed some of my later choices as well. again, where I've landed at this moment in this day, I'm grateful for all of it.
Mm. So what was it like growing up in your hometown?
Tiny. I had two brothers, and then I have two cousins, two boys that stayed with us a lot. Their parents had some addiction problems, and so I either had two brothers in the house or four brothers in the house.
Mm.
That's the way I think about it. It's a really like a pretty poor town. So I guess the good news about that is that like I didn't know we were poor. Like everybody was poor. Nobody had any
Mm.
resources. There were very few professionals in town. There were a few teachers and I think a lawyer. And so most folks worked at the automotive plant about an hour away from the town, or there are a lot of farmers, very, very rural. So
Mm.
very small town. Everybody knew everybody's business. Classic small town America.
Mm. And how old were your brothers? Were they older or younger? Where were you in the pecking order?
So I'm in the middle, and that's true whether you talk about just my brothers or adding my cousins in the mix. So I have an older brother who's 3.5 years older, a younger brother who's a year younger. My older cousin was 6 months older than my older brother, and my younger cousin was 6 months younger than me. So there
Mm.
were the kind of the older kids, 3 or 4 years older, that my Chris and Scott, and then the three little ones, me and my brother and my cousin. So we were always chasing after the older brothers. And as the only girl in a in a mix like that, especially with this sort of blue collar, rough and tumble kind of wrong side of the tracks upbringing, I was a real fierce kid and a tomboy, and I would. The quickest way to get my temper up was to say, you can't do that. You're a girl. So I would just,
Mm.
I went hard at it to compete with my brothers.
I love that. So what did you want to be when you grew up?
My earliest memory of a career path was I wanted to be a judge. Justice has always been a really important metric or North Star in my life. But then I found out you had to be an attorney before you could be a judge. And then I wasn't interested anymore. Nothing wrong with attorneys. Just didn't appeal to me.
Hmm.
But then very early on, I grabbed onto this idea of being an actor. I love to keep people interested in stories I'm telling. I like to tell jokes. I like to be the center of attention. I like to keep people interested in, spellbound in something I'm, performing. And that was my earliest career memory,
Mm.
or second earliest, I guess.
So when you were growing up, you mentioned that you grew up in a blue collar town.
Hmm.
Were there things that like were there influences of your parents that sort of led you to deciding what you wanted to be? Like, was there an influence by your father or your mother? As their only daughter, I can only imagine that, they had plans for you.
Yeah, I think, it's sort of the classic American dream. So my father did not have an education and had relatively limited job prospects and power in an area that didn't have a lot of jobs to give. My
Mm.
mother had dropped out of high school. She was a teenage mom, had three kids by 21. She eventually went back to college, actually, when I was in high school, and then she became a teacher. But at the time of my childhood, they were very clear. And it's funny you asked this question because I just asked my mom this the other day. They, from birth, had a very strong message to all three of us that like education was key. Like whatever you choose, they didn't have a certain
Mm.
career in mind for me. They didn't have a certain path other than go get a college degree that will give you choices. And it was sort of like, if I heard my dad say it once, I heard him say it 1,000 times, like education's your ticket out of here. And so from my earliest memories, like I was heading to college. And my mother, although at that time, again, was, also uneducated, was an excellent natural teacher. So it didn't surprise me at all. She ended up going back to college and becoming a teacher. She loved to teach. And so she instilled in me from, you know, early days, like love for learning, because she made it really fun and interesting. So that I think I would say is the real kind of hopes and dreams they had for me. It wasn't a certain track or a certain kind of ending point, just
Mm.
that I would have choice. That wasn't really they didn't have because they had become young parents with limited education and
Mm.
resources.
Yeah, that's so interesting because here you are, you're living in what you describe as a poor town where there's limited means, and your parents didn't go to college. They worked really hard to provide for you and your two brothers, and at an early age, instilling in you the the value of an education. It's almost like that value that you started to learn as a child really took shape throughout your career and ultimately the work that you do today, which is pretty cool.
I asked my mom this past weekend when I was visiting, how did you and dad know to even teach us that and encourage that? Like, I was one of 3 kids from my high school that went to college. Like, it was not a done thing. Nobody went to college. You went to work on your dad's farm or you went to work at the factory. Those were the 2 options. And my parents were raised in that. None of their friends had, I didn't know an entrepreneur until I was out of college. Like, I never saw a business owner, leader. Like, I didn't know that world. I didn't know anything about it. How did they know? How did they have the wisdom as young parents living in a place where this wasn't culturally taught or supported? How did they know to encourage that? And she didn't have a really good answer for me. She just said, I don't know. I don't know. It just always seemed like the right thing. So I give my parents a lot of credit because it was, sort of like, I accomplished much because they expected much. And I saw lots of other kids in my area that were talented and smart and hardworking, and nothing was expected of them. And there's been some different outcomes there.
Yeah, that's interesting because I think oftentimes in families like that, the path of least resistance is to just do what your parents are doing.
Right.
And the fact that they had a different idea, were they supportive in what you wanted to do when you went off to college?
Yeah. So let me fill in the blanks between my acting dreams and going off to college. And this is where I said before that poverty may have left a mark, a little bit of scarcity mentality, because pursuing a career in theater did not, I had no clear idea that was going to lead to anything but more of the same in terms of poverty. Like, there's no guarantees if you pursue a theater career that you'll be able to, make it. It's just such a different world. And so I wanted a surer bet, a more practical path to safety and financial security. And I was good at math and science. And so I decided to, major in engineering. And they were, of course, very supportive of that. I never got a message from them that I shouldn't pursue acting. That wasn't, they didn't dissuade me from that at all. That was sort of all me. But by the time I was heading, through about halfway through high school, I was sort of settling in on the engineering path. And they were, very pleased and proud of that, for sure.
That's fascinating. So you went to Case Western University. Tell me about your career journey there in terms of your studies. I know that you didn't just major in chemical engineering, but there were other degrees that you layered on top of that.
Well, as a poor kid, scholarship was the only way I was going to college. And so I applied for about 1 million of them, and Case gave me the most money, which is why I went there. My older brother was at Ohio State, and that's where I really wanted to go. But ironically, I couldn't afford to go there, even though that's a state school and a much lower tuition because they didn't give me a lot of money. So Case loaded me up with money, which was great. I go off to Case. My high school guidance counselor, by the way, had told me that when I said I was going to major in chemical engineering at Case Western Reserve University, which at that time, and maybe still, I don't know, was a top 25 private engineering school in the country, said I ought to set my sights a little more realistically. And it was just like when I was a little kid and they said, you can't do that because you're a girl. I was like, okay, watch me. And after my sophomore year, I had a 4.0 and I had been on the dean's list every semester, and I went back and visited Mr. Dickey, and it was just like a tiny little bit of like gloating. I was really happy to see him. And I know he was actually looking out for my best interest and wanted to see me succeed, and had maybe a concern that the school I had gone to was not good preparation for the school I was going to. And that actually turned out to be true. So I show up at Case. All these kids are coming in with sophomore level credit because they had done a bunch of AP classes and stuff in high school. I didn't know what AP was. I'd never heard of it. I was like, what's AP stand for? Like, I was so unprepared. All these kids had already had calculus. I had never had calculus. All the kids had physics and chemistry. I never had. So I had a real game of catch up to play. And I was also working a lot because I had work study as part of my financial aid package. So first couple of years were a blur, just totally like trying to keep my head above water.
So with all the engineering disciplines out there, why did you choose chemical?
Well, and it's not a great reason. I didn't really understand what engineers did, and I certainly didn't understand the differences between the disciplines. But I had done this camp between junior and senior year of high school. It was like a gifted kind of camp, and I don't know. I went away for a week to a college, and we did like half a day per discipline, and there were different disciplines kind of. And I thought the chemistry was fun because we were in a lab, mixing stuff together and watching things smoke and bubble, and it seemed more interesting to me than some of the other things.
Like, I guess, how were you feeling at that point when you graduated? Because,
Yeah.
oftentimes people are like, oh, I'm just going to get a civil engineering degree, but you went and got chemical.
It's so funny about that. My older brother's a civil engineer, and I bust on him relentlessly about it. And by the way, for anybody who's listening to this, as a civil engineer, I deeply respect the profession, but I act like I don't when I'm with my brother because it's real fun to bust his chops. Teasing is our love language in my family. So I have a good joke about civil engineers that I like to tell. But I don't think the chemical engineering choice was necessarily let me prove it by doing the hardest thing. But I think that mentality or that, like, even as an engineer, I mean, I was very often the only woman on a team. I was very often the only woman in a meeting. And then, as you continue on into like when I was an entrepreneur, there are far fewer women business owners and leaders than men. And I'm in a sales and sales profession. Sales is very male dominated. So this sort of like proving and breaking ground and, expanding territory and challenging norms has always been a pretty normal part of my life.
Mm. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. I think that oftentimes the pressure of the pressure that we put on ourselves to prove to the world that we have been validated is, I go through that every single day.
Yeah.
This
Yeah.
desire to want to be a perfectionist, and I appreciate your vulnerability there and sharing that. I think it is very relatable to what people experience, is sort of that internal voice that's constantly saying you're not doing enough. You need to do more.
Yeah. And it's, I got to a point, it wasn't sort of one moment, it was an evolution where I started to really look at what drives happiness, because accomplishments I had piled up, plenty of accomplishments, a lot to be proud of, a lot I was celebrated for. But like there was this sort of never enough kind of feeling, like I have to work harder, I have to do more, I have to, I was on this sort of treadmill, and the speed kept getting turned up and I couldn't keep up, but I was the one turning it up, so that's led me, and this is, sort of not career related, but a little bit into a path of trying to kind of do the inner work to kind of get free of the compulsion to run faster and accomplish more. It's not my job to challenge all the norms of society and fix everything. Like I can just work hard and be satisfied with my work and be proud of it, and then rest and be present, which has always been really hard for me.
So Casey, tell me, how did you turn it off? Like, how did you worked at GE, you got into corporate, you were an engineer, you were grinding, you were growing the corporate ladder. When did you say to yourself that it's time for me to make a change?
Meaning like start my own company?
I'm sort of thinking about, when did you start to realize that things were, you weren't necessarily being fulfilled, and this kind of like the hamster wheel was becoming more and more daunting, and the weight of the world was becoming heavy. And I wonder, when did you realize that it's time for me to, not to just really start to rethink my life meaning and purpose?
I think that's been a constant. I mean, there have been a couple of punctuation points along the journey, but I think that's been a 20+ year journey for me figuring that out. I remember, like, so for example, when I was early on in my GE career, and this was during the Jack Welch days of top grading, when the bottom 15% were fired every year, and the top, so I was every year I got the performance review, got a really nice, performance review, nice raise, nice. And they would, and I would say every single year, I would really love an extra week of vacation. I don't need the bigger salary. Keep it. Can I have an extra week of vacation? And GE at that time was very, very hierarchical, very old school. People were still business formal in those days. Like, it was not a place that was ready to be flexible about stuff like that. But even, that was 24 years old, I think. And I was like, I valued time and experience over money. And that was very countercultural, especially at GE. That was not so. The idea of kind of figuring out that what I valued wasn't necessarily what I was told to value is not new. And, I'll jump over, a part of the story that leads me to Boost, but like I ended up in pricing. And then when I got really really fed up with corporate America and decided to start the company, I just felt like I was working myself to the bone to make somebody else rich, and nobody cared. And none of the things I did mattered. It didn't feel meaningful to me. It's like if I worked really, 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 really hard and did a really, really, really good job, some shareholder was going to get an extra hundredth of a penny. I just couldn't connect my effort to a real meaningful difference in the world. And that started to really frustrate me. At the same time, I was, a mom of two very small kids. And I wanted to be spending more time with them. I felt like I was spending my best years in sort of some kind of indentured servitude to corporate America. And I was like, enough of this. I started to look around. By this point, my older brother was an entrepreneur and was sort of in my ear. You could do it. You could start a company. You could do this. You could. And at first that seemed terrible to me because, again, I was raised poor. So a good, stable career at a Fortune 500 company. Like, my parents thought that was it. Like, once I got the job at GE, she's set for life. She's going to work there for 30 years and retire, and everything's going to be great. Like, the gravy train had arrived because I had put myself on the right path. And so the idea of taking myself off that path and taking the risk of entrepreneurship was really uncomfortable to me. But there came a point when the discomfort of the conformity and the grind and the futility of my experience in corporate America, I couldn't take it anymore. And I started to look around and I thought, man, there are millions of business owners in this country. I'm at least as smart as a couple of them. Like, I'll figure it out. And if it crashes and burns and I fail, well, I can go get another job I hate. And that's already what I have. So I haven't lost anything. Let me try.
Yeah. You said so many things there that resonate with me. The first is just the grind. And it's interesting because you started this career where you were earning probably an incredible paycheck. And the idea of leaving that stability to go do something that is absolutely risky. You could fail at it. People, it's so interesting because when you're in a corporate job, you're getting that steady paycheck. And that's what people describe as the real world. Like, hey, you're putting in your time. You're going to do this for 30 years. Just keep grinding. You're going to eventually hit retirement, and then you're going to be able to live, and you're going to be able to have all the things that you want to enjoy. And so many people live in that situation every single day. And I wonder, what advice do you have for someone that is in the situation that you described, that they know that they're looking for something different. They want that work-life balance. They want the freedom and the flexibility. What advice do you give them?
Well, I have to first say that if I'd had any idea how work-life balance was going to go the wrong direction for a while when I became an entrepreneur, that was really hard. But the advice, I think, and I got this advice by way of a book, is to be, in my case, it wasn't that I didn't think I could, I had something valuable, some knowledge that I knew I could bring to the market. I could see how it could work, but I was really afraid, right? I was recently divorced. I had 2 little girls. There I am, a single mom. I got no family safety net. Nobody has any money in the bank to help me out if I start to struggle. There's nowhere to run for help. Um, I had like you said, a good corporate job. I had a, nice salary, benefits, healthcare, company car, all, the whole nine. And I'm getting ready to leap out into, empty air with no safety net. That looked terrifying and so terrifying I couldn't do it. And then in this one of these books I read, somebody said people don't chase their dreams because of fear, which was not new information to me. But the advice was get very, very specific about that fear. Like, what's going to happen? Really? Like, what's your actual worst case scenario? And so, of course, there had been this sort of monster under the bed of my imagining, like, oh my gosh, we're going to be homeless. My kids are going to be hungry. Like, it's going to be a disaster. But, I said, like, realistically, the worst thing that could happen, I had some savings. I would burn through the savings and go into some debt. If it got horrendously bad and, we lost our home, I could move in with one of my parents. My parents are divorced at that point. Or move in with my mom or my dad or my brother. Like, I have, nobody's able to, write me $100,000 check, but they're able to put, a sandwich in front of me. So I have like resources and a network that support and love me. And the worst thing that can happen, let's say I'd get into tons of debt and lose my home. Okay, I'm going to go get a job. I still have a good mind. It works well. I have marketable skills. I will go get a job and dig back out. That's kind of like, the illusion back to what I said is like, if the worst thing that happens is I end up right back here with a little bit more debt on the books, then that isn't a good enough reason not to try. Because the misery of this experience and the idea of living 30, 40 more years of that before I can finally enjoy my life was untenable. So I guess as I turn that into advice is to ask people to get very specific. What if what is stopping you is fear? Don't let it be fear of the unknown. Let it be fear of the known. Like, what's the worst that's going to happen? What is the worst case scenario? What's that look like? What's that? And then, and this is, what's the likelihood of that? I thought, man, I'm a harder worker than most people. I'm not the smartest person in any room, but I might be the hardest working. So if hard work makes a difference in the success of a business, then I won't fail. And if it does, I'll go get another job. So I think it's just being specific about the fear. At least that helped me a lot.
Yeah, I love that, being specific about the fear, actually visualizing what the worst case scenario is. And then when you actually create that visual, you're going to say to yourself that, okay, that actually is not so bad.
Right. It's like instead of having that scary monster under the bed, we've shined a flashlight under the bed and we've looked and we've counted the teeth and the claws and said, it's not so scary. It's just really kind of putting a boundary around the magnitude of that fear based on a realistic possible outcome versus some unspecified terror of unknown.
So, Casey, I want to shift gears a little bit here, and I would love to know, throughout your career, when was the moment when you started to sort of think about how your experience was going to lead to you starting a company?
That's a great question. I don't really know that it felt like a moment. I think it was a journey, like lots of other things. It just builds and builds and builds. I still wasn't even completely sure when I did it that it was, that it was enough. I mean, I think that's part of it is my sort of engineering mind, that I want to make sure all I's are dotted and T's are crossed. I want it to be 100% right and ready and perfect. And I like certainty a lot, and the risk and uncertainty and ambiguity of entrepreneurship was really scary to me. So I never really got to the moment where I felt like quite sure this could make a difference in the market and work. I hoped it could. I thought it could. But I think, to be perfectly candid, my entrepreneurial leap was a moment of running from something versus running to something. I wasn't necessarily sure that this new thing I was leaping into was the thing. I just couldn't do the old thing anymore. I just couldn't.
So you were working, though, in a job where you were a pricing manager.
Yep.
So tell me about that. Like, what was that experience like?
So I had moved from engineering to pricing by way of Six Sigma. I was an early Six Sigma black belt at GE, and I had done a rotation in pricing, which is where I kind of got exposed to it. And I just fell in love with the discipline. I think it's so fascinating because in my MBA class, I had taken an econ, or my MBA program, I had taken an econ class and learned about the supply demand curve and like this very sort of boring clinical relationship between price and volume. You charge more, you sell less. You charge less, you sell more. And I thought that was all there was to it. And once I really got my hands dirty in real pricing and selling conversations and price negotiations and price objection handling and it became clear to me pricing is much more than a science. It's also an art. And it's an interesting intersection of like data and psychology. And I was hooked because the data side of it really appealed to my engineering brain. But the psychology and the amorphous ambiguity and the gray was just, it was endlessly fascinating. I say pricing, real pricing in the real world is a little more like poker. It's like everybody's trying to look at the strength of their hand, guess at the strength of the other guy's hand. Everybody's bluffing. Buyers are trying to hide how much they're willing to pay. Sellers are trying to hide how little they're willing to accept. And so I just got very interested in it. And my role at first at GE and then later at AkzoNobel, another Fortune 500 company I went to work for as a pricing leader, were really about supporting the sales team to make better pricing decisions and setting the course, charting the course for the pricing strategy for the divisions I was in charge of. So it was a pretty analytical and strategic role. And that was my vision when I started, Boost. I thought I would bring what I had learned about the analytics and strategy of pricing, things like segmentation analysis and elasticity calculations and stuff like that. I was going to bring that to the middle market.
So you were working at Axo in a pricing role. And when did you start to create the Boost brand? Did you start as an independent consultant and then Boost came as a result of that? How was the company formed?
So because I am risk averse and I had two little girls to feed and they like to eat every day, the idea of jumping from a full career to that blank slate entirely in one leap was untenable to me. I found a company that was looking for some contract support. They were already doing the kind of work I was interested in doing and they needed bandwidth. And so basically I was a subcontractor for them. So I was like, well, let me fill my plate a little bit with some subcontracting work, at least keep enough money going in the door until I build my thing. And so it really, once I had an opportunity like that lined up and I knew I had some money kind of guaranteed, that's when I, resigned from Axo and I had, formed the LLC and started working as a subcontractor for that company. What was interesting about that is relatively quickly, because I was, again, pretty hard worker and they had more work than they knew what to do with, as they suddenly had filled my whole plate up. And now I was working full time for another company, not even getting some of the same benefits and considerations as an employee because I was just a subcontractor. So I just realized I had like traded one cage for another.
But probably just a smaller cage.
Yes. And I learned from it and I'm really grateful to that organization. And there were it was a really important stepping stone towards what I eventually did, because I did get to work with the kind of companies and the size of companies that I thought I was going to, kind of want to work with and help. And so there were it was a nice soft landing from this giant company to a much, that kind of middle market space, before I kind of stepped back out onto my own once I, kind of realized like, this is the same, but different. I want different.
Yeah. It sounds like it was a practice ground for you as well as a transitional place.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
So how did you come up with the name Boost Pricing?
So it's the name actually relates to a different part of the journey. So the original name, the name under which it was founded, was called Precision Pricing. And the vision for the company, based in my experience at corporate America, was to bring this analytical and strategic lens and experience to the middle market. And I did that. And to be perfectly candid, it was a mediocre result at best. And so started to, instead of be so focused on the analytical solutions, let's look at the people side. Let's look at the beliefs and skills of the people whose job it is to carry this price out into the marketplace. Because you can spend a lot of time, it's like I always say the pricing war isn't won by the generals in the war room drawing up maps. It's won in the trenches by the people who are communicating and defending that with customers in this sort of hand-to-hand combat of day-to-day price negotiations. And so you could have the best strategy in the world and you hand it to a sales team who's not well equipped, you don't have their hearts and minds, then they'll march right around that strategy and discount anyway. So I started to develop initially with the idea of it as an additional offering. In addition to the strategy and analytics, I'm going to develop this sort of training stuff that helps the team. Well, the results went gangbusters. They just took off. They were so good. The results for my clients, their financial performance improved so dramatically from this second piece that it didn't take long for me to ask, I wonder if we only did the second piece, how much of the benefit we could get? And the answer is 90% of it. So I was like, well, let's not do this expensive, time-consuming, long, painful first bit where we're, devising this perfect strategy. Let's just train the team. And so no longer did precision pricing, which is this sort of like, it invokes this idea of calculations to get really precise measurements. And that wasn't the problem. What we needed to do is boost the confidence and skill set of the team. And so precision pricing didn't fit. We rebranded. We have been boost pricing ever since.
So the boost pricing isn't necessarily connected to boosting your revenues. It's really about boosting the team and building confidence in the team.
That's right.
That drives the results that you're looking for.
That's right. So if I can tie this back to, where we started this conversation, it's all about value and getting paid for value. If you have something of value, I'm going to presume people listening to this have a product or service or a set of expertise or knowledge or skills that are valuable. If you don't have something valuable, then go work on it. But if you have something valuable, then the difference between the people that are getting paid very well for it and the people are not is a function of confidence. Because most pricing decisions in the world are made from fear, not confidence. We're pricing not to lose rather than pricing to win. And so confidence is the currency of commanding the pricing you deserve. And so boost for me is about confidence.
Oh, I love that. And I have a note here from your TED Talk. No one will ever pay you for what you're worth.
The rest of that is they'll only ever pay you what they think you're worth.
Yeah.
And you control their thinking. You can drive that. You can influence that. And that's through a healthy and an appropriate amount of confidence and the messaging to go with it.
It's appropriate. And I wonder with the confidence, when you have the confidence, you have leverage. How do you translate the confidence and leverage into results? So you have the confidence and you have the leverage because of sort of the value that you're bringing. How do you know how much is the right amount versus being too greedy?
Meaning how far to push to be paid more?
Yes.
I have a pretty unsatisfying answer for that, which is I don't know. But let me color that in a little bit. So nobody knows. And this is true, again, whether you're selling a good or service or you're selling your own, labor efforts to an employer. There's nobody else that can offer what you can offer. Not exactly. There are some people that offer a little more of that and a little less of that. You are a product of one. If you're a human being selling your time and talent to a company, there is one of you. This is not a commodity. This does not exist anywhere else in the world. And so because that's true, there's no history we can look around at and determine exactly what that number should be. There's guidelines. Like if you're a web developer with this kind of skill set, with this many years of experience, you can get market information that can point you in some ranges, but where you belong in that range, or maybe even pushing that range just a teeny bit further, is a function of your specific fit for the needs of your customer. And in that case, it's an employer. And just as importantly, not just how valuable you are to them, but also your ability to communicate that and command that through asking and defending your value, asking for a higher price, aka a higher salary, and defending your value. So nobody knows where the cliff is. What I will tell you from my 25 plus years of experience in pricing is that it isn't where you think it is. You're thinking, oh my gosh, if I go ask for 5% more or $5,000 more a year or whatever, like, oh my gosh, like we're perseverating, we're wringing our hands, we're worrying about that. The cliff is further away than you think. I've seen I can count on one hand in my entire career the number of times that the cliff was closer than the person thought.
I love that. I love how you connected the confidence to the outcome, but also making it objective. Like, I think that if your ask is subjective and it's not connected to some fact or some data point, it's really hard to defend why you should be getting what you think you deserve.
100%. And if, for somebody that wants to dive further into this, my TED Talk talks about this very specifically. The need to define for yourself before you go talk to your boss or your client or whoever, define the value. And not like, I want more money or I would like to buy a boat. Like, what did you do? What do you do that creates value for the person you're asking to give you money? Every time, and this is true again, whether you're a business selling products or services, you're a human selling your time and talent, is the reason somebody should pay you more is because you're worth it. And you have to help them understand that you're worth it. And it's not through subjective measures. Like you said, it's objective. That doesn't mean you have to be able to quantify to the nth degree every aspect of it, but you ought to be able to articulate and defend that the value really is there. And be realistic with yourself about it. I mean, nobody's great at everything. That's there's a lot of things I'm good at. There's a lot of things I'm terrible at. So don't go in kind of lying to yourself and your boss or your client about where you're perfect. But have a realistic understanding of your value and know that you're probably constraining your that break point, that cliff. You're probably putting that too close in front of you. It's not there.
That's so well said. So well said. So Casey, I've absolutely loved our conversation today. Like, I feel like your journey has been like what you're doing today is a culmination of building blocks of things that you experienced throughout your career. And you've just shared so many nuggets that are absolutely relatable to people who are struggling with demonstrating their worth and the value they bring to the market. And so everything that you shared today, I feel like is going to connect with so many people. So I really appreciate that.
Thank you. I have also really enjoyed the conversation. I think some of the questions you asked me today have caused me to make some connections that I hadn't quite made before between different elements of my life. So I appreciate that opportunity for reflection. I think, also as I'm hearing you say that, and anybody that might be listening to this and my journey, nothing about it has been a straight line. Like, at no point could I look 3 years in the future and predict what my life was going to be like, including you kind of mentioned the 5-year look back from you and I knowing each other. At no point was I completely clear or even very clear what the far future held. The most I could see out was a year or 2 or 3. And there's been some big pivots. I did not think I would be running a training company. I thought I would be nerding out behind Excel spreadsheets. That's why I started the company to bring, so I think I have, I've had a lot of unexpected twists and turns. And I think that's important for anybody who's earlier on in that journey, who's maybe thinking about starting a company or changing careers or, I always wanted to have everything figured out. But however much I had figured out, there was a bunch I didn't know, and it's all worked out. I think it's, there's that saying like, oh, she was a 10-year overnight success or something like from the outside stuff looks so simple sometimes. Like, oh, look at that person. They're making so much money, or they're on these stages, or they're, there's some kind of like external view that looks really easy and really simple. It may not look easy. It wasn't hard work, but it looks like a really straight line. And that's not how real life is. And I think don't let lack of certainty or the windy path that you've been on and are on be the reason you don't do what you love.
That's so well said. So Casey, how do people find you?
Yeah, so I do a lot of stuff about pricing on LinkedIn, a lot of videos and blogs and sharing articles and things like that. That's the place I'm probably the most active. And so you can find me, Casey Brown Boost. You can find me there. Also, we put out anybody who is in the business of selling anything, products, services, their time and talent. We have a blog on our company website, boostpricing.com, which is free. So I'm a big fan of having some free resources for everyone. We also I just wrote a book and published the book last November. It's called Fearless Pricing. And so for somebody that has greater than $0 to spend, but doesn't want to spend a lot, you can get a Kindle version for less than $10 to dive deeper into the concepts, a lot of which of course, we didn't explore here, but who just want to be able to command the prices they deserve.
I love that. Well, we're going to share everything in our notes so people will find you. And Casey, thanks so much for your time.
No, thank you, Raymond. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah. And thanks everyone for listening. Until next time. Hello, Raymond again here. Thank you again to our sponsor, Career Minds, a global provider of outplacement and career development services. And if you'd like to connect with me about your own personal career journey, you can connect with me on LinkedIn, as well as find me on Instagram at raymondlee.co. Until next time, remember, if you're stuck or unsure of your future and you think it's time for a change, I would encourage you to ask these 3 questions. Does my career or work make me feel alive? Am I doing the things that matter to me most? And am I creating value for myself and for others? Until next time.